300 raiders charge Greywood, expecting another helpless farming town. Bloodblade Baron never sees the trap waiting beneath his horses. Laurian Bohunia stands behind the palisade, protecting 6,000 lives. If Greywood falls tonight, every home, harvest, and family goes with it. Laurian's system pays 1 silver coin per registered resident every day. That makes survival more profitable than any treasure Bloodblade can steal. The first cavalry wave vanishes into a trench packed with stakes. By dawn, the raid is crushed, and Greywood is still paying. The battle is the payoff to months of choices that looked wasteful when Laurian first made them. Trenches, food stores, paid soldiers, imported iron, and repaired roofs all converge on the same night. Bloodblade sees only wooden walls because he has no idea how much money Laurian already buried behind them. Laurian sees the riders differently, as a direct threat to every resident whose continued survival funds the next day. The attack begins with riders pouring from the black pines in a loose mass, torches bobbing across the slope. Laurian watches the system's future income standing behind those walls and refuses to let bandits erase a single paying resident. Bloodblade Baron leads from the front beneath a crooked banner marked by a dripping red blade. His single visible eye and easy grin make him recognizable even through darkness because he wears notoriety like part of his armor. The banner itself looks crudely stitched, which somehow makes the raiding column feel more confident rather than less organized. He carries the relaxed confidence of a man who has burned 100 weak settlements and expects another effortless harvest. Greywood looks exactly like the sort of place he usually destroys. Wooden walls, farm roofs, and frightened torchlight. What he cannot see is the trench Laurian ordered dug 2 weeks earlier, after deciding the eastern approach looked too convenient. The first wave reaches the outer field at full speed, then horses and riders drop as the ground disappears beneath them. Screams cut across the dark before bodies slam onto stakes, and dozens of torches vanish inside the trench. The charge behind them crashes into the wreckage, forcing men and horses together exactly where Laurian wanted congestion. From the rampart, Gareth uses that confusion instead of wasting time on heroic speeches his soldiers do not need. He reminds 500 iron guards that retreat means their wives starve and their children return to frozen roads. Then he gives them the number that matters most. 2 silver coins paid immediately for every dead raider. The promised bounty travels down the wall faster than any speech about duty, because every guard understands what 2 silver coins can buy. Men who once fought simply to survive now have households calculating winter flour, firewood, and clothing behind them. That difference turns fear into anger instead of panic when the raiders hit the trench. Gareth learned Laurian's language quickly because 6 months earlier he had been starving with nothing worth protecting. Now he commands farmers and beggars who have roofs, food, wages, and families they refuse to surrender. The Iron Guard fires ragged volleys from the wall, more enthusiastic than precise, but precision is unnecessary at this range. Raiders packed around the trench make easy targets, while defenders loose arrows into shapes lit by scattered flames. Near the granary, Pete fights without formation, using a wood-cutting axe and the strength of a man guarding his first real home. 3 raiders push toward the iron cooking pots that fed him when he arrived in Greywood half-starved. Pete plants himself in their path and drops the first attacker with a brutal swing that should have been clumsy. There is no refined technique in the strike. Pete simply refuses to let armed strangers reach the pots that once kept him from starving. That stubbornness lets an ordinary laborer fight above the level anyone would have expected from him months earlier. He tears the axe free, smashes a shield with his shoulder, and keeps the raiders away from the food stores behind him. To Pete, those cauldrons are not equipment. They are proof that his old life of hunger does not have to return. Laurian sees the same thing from above and notes how cheaply reliable loyalty can be purchased when hunger once ruled a man's life. The second bandit wave begins to slow after seeing their friends trapped, pierced, and buried in muddy darkness. Horses back away instead of advancing, and the confidence of experienced raiders turns into the first calculation of escape. They expected prayers, weak fences, and a few frightened farmers, not disciplined defenders protecting something they finally value. Bloodblade Baron recognizes the failure too and wheels his horse toward the eastern road before the disaster can swallow him. Laurian has already prepared cavalry behind the eastern rise for exactly that retreat. The cavalry had been hidden before the first horn, not improvised after Bloodblade chose to retreat. Laurian planned around the assumption that experienced raiders would run the instant easy profit became expensive. The eastern road was therefore left looking open long enough to become the route every frightened rider wanted. Closing it only after the retreat began converts instinct into a trap the bandits choose for themselves. His signal sends riders around the flank, while Bloodblade survivors are still trying to decide whether they are fleeing. Greywood's cavalry cuts the road, closes the escape route, and turns a retreat into an encirclement before panic becomes organized. Laurian rides with the front rank because he refuses to delegate the moments that determine whether his territory survives. He also wants Bloodblade Baron to see who is collecting the price for tonight's mistake. His order across the field is simple: keep the leader alive and leave no other raider capable of returning. Laurian does not consider that mercy. In his mind, it is the removal of future threats to more than 6,000 residents. Every bandit who dies here is one fewer variable capable of cutting his daily population income later. That cold arithmetic does not make him calmer, because someone deliberately chose his citizens as property to steal and slaughter. Greywood's cavalry crashes into the collapsing line, and organized resistance disappears beneath blades, horses, mud, and panic. The fight becomes a harvest, with trapped raiders dropping weapons, only to discover the ring around them has already closed. Laurian keeps watching the eastern road, the only path Bloodblade Baron could still use if the cordon opens for even a moment. One rider nearly breaks through on Laurian's right, so Laurian kills him personally and closes the gap again. By midnight, the raid has stopped being a battle. It is a scattered collapse inside a field Greywood controls completely. Horses scream in the dark while scattered torches go out one by one, leaving the mud darker each time another flame disappears. Laurian knows some of those sounds will probably follow him into sleep, but he never lets his attention leave the remaining escape road. By 4 in the morning, roughly 260 raiders lie dead across the mud, trench, and road. Many bodies in the trench cannot be counted cleanly, because mud, horses, and sharpened stakes have collapsed together. Laurian accepts an approximate total because exact accounting matters less than knowing the raiding force no longer exists. The surviving 30 are valuable, precisely because the battle has already removed their ability to threaten the town as a unit. About 30 remain alive, wounded badly enough that none can simply run when the sun rises. The Iron Guard drags those survivors into the square, hamstrings them to prevent escape, and stakes them where everyone can see. The procedure was planned before the raid, because Laurian had already discussed how Greywood should handle dangerous repeat offenders who survive capture. Bloodblade Baron is placed at the front, with one eye following the growing crowd around him. More than 6,000 residents leave their homes beneath a gray dawn to face the men who tried to burn Greywood. Laurian expects fear, but the crowd instead carries the quiet anger of people who finally believe someone will defend them. Gareth finds him near the square and reports the cost on Greywood's side: 15 guards dead and 8 more wounded. Laurian keeps the expression expected from a grieving commander, while his mind immediately translates casualties into lost daily income. 15 dead residents mean 15 silver coins missing every morning, for as long as Laurian remains lord here. In Laurian's first ugly calculation, 15 missing daily coins become more than 5,000 silver lost across a single year. He hates that the annualized number reaches him before grief does, but pretending otherwise would not make the thought disappear. Gareth never hears that calculation, because Laurian knows some truths are useful only inside the person cursed with thinking them. The financial thought disgusts him even while it arrives automatically, because those dead men had become more than ledger entries. He walks among the wounded and promises each survivor that Greywood will provide for every family affected by the battle. He tells them the town remembers who bled for it, and the words come out more sincerely than he wants to examine. Laurian still hates the permanent income loss, but he is also genuinely relieved that the wounded men are breathing. He has no time to decide which feeling is more honest, because Bloodblade Baron starts bargaining from his stake. The captured raider offers buried gold, hidden caches, old raid halls, and the locations of rival camps in exchange for freedom. Bloodblade keeps adding information whenever Laurian remains silent, mistaking patience for evidence that the ransom might eventually become large enough. He offers names of other camps as casually as treasure locations. Proving loyalty among raiders lasts only until one leader's neck reaches the block. Laurian lets him list everything, because listening costs nothing, and because the desperation is useful information. When Bloodblade finishes, Laurian explains that buried treasure is a one-time payment, and one-time payments no longer impress him. Greywood's residents each produce 1 silver coin every day under Laurian's system for as long as they remain registered and alive. 6,000 people therefore represent a river of recurring wealth, while Bloodblade's hidden fortune is only a puddle. A raider trying to purchase that river with one buried chest has misunderstood Laurian as badly as he misunderstood Greywood's defenses. Laurian ends the negotiation himself, drawing his blade and executing Bloodblade Baron in front of the town. The square falls silent because everyone understands the message without needing another body added to it. Laurian turns to the crowd and declares that anyone attacking Greywood is attacking him personally. His protection is not temporary generosity. Once people live under his rule, he intends to make that promise expensive to challenge. The residents erupt, calling him protector, lord, and savior because they have spent years assuming no noble would stand between them and raiders. Laurian accepts the praise while knowing his original motivation was simply to defend the income attached to their lives. The cheering is not polished loyalty. It is the release of people who expected another lord to hide while they paid the price. Greywood's residents have now watched Laurian risk his own body on the same field where their sons and husbands fought. Whatever his private motive, the public result is a promise proven in blood, rather than proclaimed from a safe hall. The problem is that protecting an income stream made of living people looks almost identical to caring for those people properly. At 6 that morning, the familiar system chime arrives with the calm precision of bookkeeping after a night of bloodshed. Greywood's population stands at 6,285, and the same number of silver coins is deposited automatically. The count barely moved despite the attack, which tells Laurian the town survived without catastrophic civilian losses. Watching the system process payments so calmly after a massacre feels strangely reassuring, even to someone who trusts numbers more than comfort. Ball soon asks the practical question waiting in the square: what should Greywood do with the 30 surviving prisoners? Execution would make a warning, but Laurian suddenly wonders whether the system cares about freedom when deciding who counts as population. If a legally registered slave produces the same daily coin as a free citizen, the prisoners are worth more alive than dead. Laurian chooses one bandit as a test and has him dragged to the same registration table used for new residents. Ball inks the prisoner's thumb and presses it onto a document declaring the man permanent property under Greywood's legal registry. The captive does not understand the experiment, but the system responds the instant the mark becomes valid. Population rises from 6,285 to 6,286. Laurian almost smiles, because the universe has just confirmed that slavery changes legal status but not population value. The new rule changes the economics of every future conflict before Laurian even finishes the experiment. Prisoners no longer have to be weighed only against ransom, execution, or the cost of feeding them in confinement. Registration means captivity itself can become a revenue-producing status if Greywood can keep the captive alive. The discovery is morally darker than the raid victory, but financially it may matter far longer. Every prisoner kept alive can therefore produce 1 silver coin every day, while also performing forced labor. The discovery turns captives from expensive mouths into recurring assets in Laurian's calculations. He addresses the remaining prisoners with a public speech about mercy, atonement, and choosing labor instead of execution. The generous language satisfies the crowd, but the actual terms are permanent confinement inside a fenced quarry outside town. The prisoners will break stone from sunrise until dark, receive enough food to remain productive, and be punished for refusing work. Ball records the arrangement while wondering whether Laurian has shown compassion or simply dressed a profitable sentence in moral language. Laurian knows the suspicion is fair and does not bother resolving it for anyone, including himself. 30 registered prisoners march toward the quarry that morning, adding 30 daily silver coins and an unpaid labor force at once. The stakes remain in the square behind them, while smoke still rises from the battlefield outside the wall. Laurian studies both scenes and understands the loophole is far too useful to remain a one-time experiment. From now on, any enemy captured alive can become labor, population, and recurring income instead of another body requiring burial. Greywood survived the raid, but Laurian's real victory is learning that even a defeated enemy can be converted into growth. The quarry also gives Laurian a place to isolate dangerous captives while extracting stone needed for roads, walls, and construction. What looks like punishment therefore solves labor demand, security, and population growth in one administrative decision. With the immediate threat gone, he turns from killing raiders to building an economy capable of surviving the winter they nearly interrupted. Laurian's next obsession is not treasure, but ugly wagon loads of pig iron, because finished goods carry margins he would rather keep. Buying polished tools from merchants would mean paying someone else for every step between raw metal and useful equipment. So instead of importing tools, he imports 6 blacksmiths and pays the travel costs required to bring production inside Greywood. Raw pig iron arrives by the wagon at a fraction of the price of finished axes, shovels, and picks. The smiths raise canvas workshops along the town's edge, and within days hammer blows become part of Greywood's daily noise. Laurian spends long stretches watching sparks jump from anvils while calculating how many units of labor each finished tool can multiply. Every axe head means faster timber cutting, every shovel means more earth moved, and every pick means more stone extracted. He does not see a forge producing objects. He sees productivity compounding in physical form. Roughly 2,000 iron tools reach local households over the following days, replacing the wooden and stone equipment people inherited for years. Most households have never owned enough iron for every adult to carry a dedicated tool. A good axe head can survive several generations, which explains why recipients handle mass-produced equipment like heirlooms. That cultural gap helps Laurian understand why industrial supply has value beyond raw output. Reliable tools also change what ordinary families believe is possible. Laurian's wholesale logic feels ordinary to him, only because his previous world trained people to expect manufacturing at scale. To Greywood, 2,000 tools appearing within days borders on a social revolution. The distribution looks absurdly emotional to Laurian because families treat a good shovel like something closer to a royal gift. One elderly woman holds her new tool with both arms, tracing the iron connection as though confirming it really belongs to her. The sight makes Laurian uncomfortable in a way pure accounting never does, so he retreats to the easier language of output. Gareth provides that language several days later, when Laurian finds him beyond the eastern fields, measuring the change himself. Wooden hoes crack under hard soil, stone axes rebound from roots, and poor equipment wastes more strength than most farmers can spare. Iron simply cuts through the problem, and Gareth estimates his crews are producing close to 3 times their previous output. Laurian trusts the number immediately, because repeated across hundreds of households, that increase can transform the entire barony before winter. Ball is far less comfortable when he opens the books and totals nearly 500 gold spent on smiths, metal, and distribution. He presents the expense as if Greywood has suffered a wound, and Laurian lets him finish before answering. Laurian asks what Ball plans to do when the first hard frost seals the northern roads and grain caravans can no longer reach them. Ball has no answer because purchasing survival through winter was never a dependable plan in the first place. Greywood needs to feed itself, repair its own roofs, reclaim neglected farmland, and plant before frozen soil closes the season. None of that happens quickly enough with broken wooden tools, so the 500 gold is not luxury spending. Laurian treats it as the cost of making future daily income possible, instead of watching his population freeze or starve. Laurian's deadlines are physical rather than ceremonial. Winter wheat must enter soil before frost locks the ground, and greenhouses must stand before snow. Roof repairs matter for the same reason, because a family that survives under dry timber remains part of the system's next payout. Field clearing, drainage, and tool distribution are separate tasks, but every one of them points toward the same objective of winter self-sufficiency. Ball eventually writes the plan despite visibly disliking how much treasury Laurian is willing to risk before the first harvest proves anything. The stronger tools immediately go into housing repairs, field clearing, drainage, and the winter wheat plan Laurian is forcing onto a short calendar. He gives the administration firm deadlines because vague goals become excuses the moment weather turns bad. Ball writes every requirement down with the expression of a man documenting his own future headache. What calms Laurian is the system deposit, arriving every morning from more than 6,000 registered residents. At that scale, an expensive investment can repay itself surprisingly fast if it preserves the population producing the revenue. Laurian thinks of infrastructure spending less as generosity and more as renewing the subscription that keeps his barony solvent. That pleasant calculation is interrupted when a runner announces a slave caravan outside the gate under the name Black Crow. Laurian's first reaction is immediate interest, because every healthy captive represents labor, population, and another recurring daily silver coin. He goes to inspect the caravan personally rather than trust anyone else with what he considers asset acquisition. The wagons smell of sweat, rust, rope, and bodies kept too close together for too long. Bound captives stand in a line while Laurian walks past slowly, judging not beauty or obedience but survival probability. A man with ribs showing through paper-thin skin is rejected because Laurian expects him to die before becoming productive. Another captive cannot put steady weight on one leg, so Laurian rejects him as another bad long-term investment. More than half the line fails his inspection, and he refuses to pretend sentiment will keep unhealthy people alive by itself. The Black Crow trader watches potential coin vanish with every shake of Laurian's head and finally offers a hidden special case. He brings out a young half-elf woman who had once held an academic position before the Church of Light stripped away her status. Dirt under her fingernails catches Laurian's attention first because it looks like evidence of deliberate work in soil. The trader explains that she was condemned for publishing agricultural research considered blasphemous by the church. Her forbidden method involved composting human and animal waste back into farmland to drastically improve crop yield. Nobles nearby recoil at the idea, but Laurian hears only the possibility of producing much more food from the same acres. Knowledge from his previous life tells him the church's taboo is nonsense. Compost is chemistry, not heresy. Ella's paper was dangerous in this society because it challenged religious authority with something farmers could verify using their own fields. A doctrine can survive argument more easily than a neighboring acre producing twice as much grain. That is why Laurian values her research beyond the immediate compost recipe. She knows how to test agricultural assumptions instead of inherit them. Her hands tell him she also performed the work herself, rather than remaining an academic who only wrote about dirt from clean rooms. The trader asks 1,000 silver or 10 gold, several times the price of a powerful field laborer. Laurian pays immediately because a mind capable of increasing harvests is worth far more than another pair of arms. The trader's confidence falters while counting the money, sensing too late that Laurian may have noticed value he completely missed. Before the woman receives food or rest, Laurian names her chief agricultural officer of Greywood. She gives no thanks and instead studies exits, doors, and distances, like someone expecting ownership to bring a different kind of danger. That evening, she enters Laurian's hall prepared for a confrontation over what her new owner intends to demand from her personally. Laurian removes the ambiguity immediately, telling her he has no interest in her body and purchased her expertise instead. What he wants is her research, her judgment, and the hands that understand soil better than anyone currently in Greywood. A suspicion leaves her posture slowly, because experience has taught her to expect powerful men to contradict promises once doors close. Laurian does not change his position, and moves directly to the problem that actually interests him. Can her methods, backed by an entire barony's labor and resources, produce enough food before winter shuts the roads? She studies him carefully, and answers with a budget of hundreds of gold, a number large enough to expose an unsuspicious patron immediately. Laurian recognizes the figure as more than a budget request. It is a test shaped by years of being mocked and denied resources. Ella has heard promises from authority figures before, which is why enthusiasm would have frightened her more than Laurian's cold questions. A budget test lets her discover whether he wants results or merely the appearance of supporting an unusual scholar. The system's morning deposit answers that question, without requiring either of them to trust the other's personality. Instead of bargaining, he tells her to meet him in the square at 6 the next morning and see what Greywood can actually afford. She arrives early with crossed arms and the expression of someone expecting another nobleman's confidence to collapse under arithmetic. At exactly 6, the system performs its daily settlement, and silver begins appearing in ordered stacks before the gathered officials. Greywood now holds 6,352 registered souls, and each one generates another silver coin that morning. The half-elf watches thousands of coins appear from nowhere, while every assumption she made about Laurian's poverty falls apart. Her arms uncross before she seems aware of doing it, and for several seconds she has no response to a treasury that rebuilds itself every morning. Laurian does not waste the moment boasting. He simply tells her the agricultural budget is effectively unlimited if the return justifies it. He formally names her Minister of Agriculture before the crowd and gives her authority to begin immediately. The shift in her expression has little to do with money and everything to do with finally receiving permission to prove her work. She swears service to Greywood with the steadiness of someone who has spent years waiting for one room that will not burn her research. Within a day, that trust produces her first command, and it nearly causes a town-wide revolt. Ella orders every capable household to help spread composted human and animal waste across 2,000 acres of reclaimed farmland. Gareth, normally Laurian's most dependable supporter, is among the first to object because local belief treats the practice as contamination of sacred ground. Farmers cross themselves, refuse carts, and stare at the waste piles as though Ella has asked them to fertilize crops with a curse. Laurian goes into the field himself because an order becomes harder to dismiss when the lord issuing it is willing to stand inside the smell. The compost hits him with rot and ammonia strong enough to water his eyes, but he refuses to step away. Then Laurian borrows the religious language he does not personally believe and declares the compost sacred, soil blessed for harvest. He copies the open posture and confident tone of priests because borrowed conviction is still useful when the audience values it. Laurian knows his sermon is fabricated, but he also knows attacking the villagers' faith would create resistance with no productive return. Using their existing beliefs lets him move behavior without demanding that anyone first adopt his worldview. The copper and meat then convert reluctant obedience into a competition people actively choose to win. Ella is watching two technologies at once that day: compost for soil and incentives for human labor. The declaration earns uncertain nods, but faith alone does not put enough shovels into motion to cover 2,000 acres. So Laurian adds extra meat rations for every household completing its share and a copper bonus for each full cart delivered. Resistance changes almost instantly once the task has a visible reward attached to it. Gareth goes from condemning the filthy work to calculating how many loads his sons can move before sunset. By noon, families are racing carts across the field, placing small bets and marking totals on a fence with charcoal. Religious horror disappears beneath competition, food, and coin faster than any sermon could have managed. Ella watches the transformation from the edge of the field, with open disbelief at how quickly Laurian redirected the crowd. He explains that self-interest moves people more reliably than belief when the reward is immediate enough to touch. Ella does not argue. Instead, she watches workers differently, learning that administration may depend as much on incentives as knowledge. Laurian notices the lesson taking hold and leaves her to turn 2,000 acres of offensive waste into the foundation of winter food. Another experiment is already unfolding beyond town, this time among the prisoners Laurian converted into quarry slaves. One of them, Scarface Kyle, wakes each morning with his shoulder aching from stone hauling and expects the work to kill him eventually. That expectation is rational, because quarry labor under ordinary lords burns through workers as though bodies were replaceable tools. Laurian knows the mortality rate and reaches the opposite conclusion: an asset that dies before repaying its cost is badly managed. When temperatures plunge hard enough to crack standing water, he orders a second hot ration for every slave crew. The meal includes broth, bread, and meat, not because Laurian suddenly believes imprisonment should feel comfortable. His reasoning is simple: cold workers slow down, sick workers stop, and dead workers produce nothing. Kyle never hears that explanation. He only receives a steaming bowl on a morning when he expected another thin ration. Guards distribute the food without speeches or demands for gratitude, which makes the gesture stranger to him than charity would have been. According to another prisoner, it is the first meal in 3 years Kyle did not have to steal, fight for, or defend afterward. He eats slowly while comparing the misery of his former bandit life with the brutal but predictable routine inside Greywood's quarry. Bandit nights meant leaking roofs, unstable fires, stolen food, betrayal, and the constant possibility of an arrow from soldiers or friends. Slave life means chains and exhausting work, but also a roof, scheduled meals, and a lord who loses money if Kyle freezes to death. Kyle's conclusion matters because Laurian never promises freedom, friendship, or redemption to obtain it. Predictability alone is enough to beat a former life built on hunger and betrayal. That makes the quarry system more stable than constant terror would have been, even while remaining coercive and brutal. Kyle reaches a conclusion Laurian never needs to force into him. Escaping would return him to a life worse than staying. Pickaxe, the hot broth, and the winter roof create an obedience stronger than chains because Kyle chooses the safer ledger himself. Laurian considers that voluntary decision one of the most efficient returns his forced labor system has produced so far. At 6 the next morning, the system reports 6,381 registered residents, including 34 permanent slaves. Kyle is one of them, and his daily silver value arrives at exactly the same rate as a free farmer or soldier. Laurian privately concludes that slavery is the most profitable financial instrument he has discovered in this backward economy. Wages disappear, negotiation disappears, and basic food and shelter return their costs through labor before the system income is even counted. A free worker can leave for better terms. A slave cannot, and Kyle has now decided he no longer wants to. Laurian even catches himself hoping another bandit company will attack, because failed raids can become free shipments of quarry labor. He recognizes the moral ugliness of that thought, accepts it, and continues reading the morning ledger. The next major opportunity arrives on the Eastern Road, under the banner of the Golden Eagle Merchant Guild. Their steward Mars enters Greywood wearing clean boots and the expression of a trader who already expects desperation to inflate his profits. Rumors described Laurian as an exiled upstart short on supplies and likely to overpay for anything needed before winter. Mars therefore brings wheat, sheepskin coats, salt, and other necessities priced at roughly 5 times an honest market rate. He expects starving peasants and broken walls, but the gate opens onto fresh timber defenses, full granaries, and orderly streets. 500 iron guards stand in matching equipment, disciplined enough that their stillness makes Mars reassess his assumptions before negotiations begin. His eyes move from wall to soldiers to stored grain, recalculating whether this customer is weak enough to exploit safely. Mars still presents his inflated prices, more from professional habit than confidence, and Laurian refuses to haggle. Instead, Laurian orders his stewards to bring out chests containing 40,000 silver pieces, equivalent to 400 gold. Morning light flashes across the coin while Mars counts the chests, without even realizing he is doing it. Laurian offers a fair price for the entire shipment, slightly generous, and paid immediately rather than squeezed down for pride. That behavior confuses a merchant prepared for either desperate acceptance or hostile bargaining. Before Mars can recover, Laurian presents the real reason he wanted him impressed, rather than defeated. Greywood needs an exclusive supply relationship, covering future grain, coats, salt, pig iron, livestock, captives, and displaced refugees. Laurian wants the Merchant Guild to become the artery feeding population growth, while Greywood expands its own capacity. Refugees in his mind are not merely mouths. They are future residents, whose registration can create permanent daily revenue. Mars looks again at the silver guards and granaries, then decides continuing business with Greywood is worth more than one inflated sale. He promises priority shipments and signs terms before his superiors have even reviewed the opportunity. Mars also receives something more valuable than a single profitable invoice, proof that Laurian pays quickly and can purchase at scale. That reputation gives the guild a reason to prioritize Greywood even before exclusive paperwork becomes meaningful. Laurian would rather make one merchant eager to return than save a few coins by humiliating him across a bargaining table. Laurian ends the day satisfied because 6,381 people now have food, salt, clothing, and a supply line into spring. That satisfaction matters immediately when the first true blizzard of the season arrives during the night. Wind drives snow sideways against Greywood, hard enough to kill families in the thin huts that stood here before Laurian's rebuilding campaign. Laurian understands winter mortality as another balance sheet risk, but people inside those houses experience the preparation very differently. In the surf quarter, a woman named Martha wakes from a nightmare, convinced the cold has reached her young son Pete. Her hand searches the dark for freezing skin and instead finds a warm child beneath thick sheepskin blankets. The walls do not rattle, the roof holds, and Pete sleeps with a stomach full of stew from the emergency ration issued before the storm. Half awake, Pete repeats the town crier's blunt order that everyone remain indoors because dying wastes the Baron's resources. The crier also joked that families trapped together for several days might as well increase Greywood's population while waiting. Pete laughs at the scandalous suggestion, and Martha laughs with him before tears start coming for a completely different reason. A season earlier, the same storm could have killed them quietly before anyone important learned their names. In neighboring baronies, death like that often remain hidden until spring thaw reveals which huts stopped producing smoke weeks earlier. Now they have timber walls, firewood, warm clothing, food, and a lord whose strange obsession with productivity requires them to survive. Similar tears appear in other homes, as families realize the blizzard outside cannot reach them the way previous winters did. People compare Laurian's preparations to divine care, even though he ordered every measure because dead residents produce neither work nor system silver. Once again, correct arithmetic viewed from the outside resembles kindness so closely that nobody living beneath it cares about the distinction. Martha does not know the exact cost of the sheepskins, timber, stew, and emergency wood stored for the storm. She only knows the cold failed to enter the room where her son was sleeping. That gap between Laurian's motive and a resident's experience keeps widening as Greywood becomes safer. People judge government by whether children wake warm, not by the ledger calculation that purchased the blanket. Morning buries Greywood beneath snow deep enough to swallow roads, fences, and a grown man's legs. The landscape appears finished until spring, but Ella's greenhouses are operating under completely different conditions. Laurian had them dug low into the earth with heated flues carrying warmth beneath planting beds instead of wasting into open air. Inside those structures, thin green wheat shoots rise from dark soil, while the entire territory outside lies frozen white. Ella circles the beds as though the seedlings might vanish if she accepts their existence too quickly. She admits her composting method alone should not have produced this result during such severe cold. The underground heating design and enriched soil are strengthening each other, creating an environment neither method could provide alone. Laurian ignores the miracle language and asks for projections, because green shoots are only useful if they become enough food. Ella estimates that 2,000 treated acres plus 20 operational greenhouses could eventually feed Greywood's current population for 3 years. Her estimate changes the way she looks at Laurian as well, because his strange heating design has turned her rejected agricultural theory into something larger than either idea alone. Laurian hears the number and immediately stops thinking about 6,000 people. 3 years of food security means Greywood can deliberately import residents instead of merely trying to keep existing ones alive. His mind jumps toward 20,000 registered people and the tens of thousands of silver coins that population could create every morning. Ella raises the expensive firewood needed to keep the flues burning all winter, worried the system may consume too much treasury. Laurian tells her fuel costs are irrelevant if they are purchasing crop survival and future population capacity. To him, treasury reserves have no sacred value. Money in sitting safely in a chest is useless when spending it can expand the system that refills the chest. The 20 greenhouses are still tiny compared with 2,000 open acres, but they prove Greywood can manipulate growing conditions instead of surrendering to season. For Ella, that proof validates years of work the church treated as dangerous arrogance. For Laurian, it means population ceilings can be raised with infrastructure, rather than accepted as fixed by climate. He leaves the greenhouse already turning the harvest into expansion figures before Ella finishes discussing the plants themselves. Weeks of intermittent blizzards pass before Mars returns through the western gate with a caravan Laurian initially greets as a major success. Roughly 1,200 refugees have been purchased cheaply from lords, unable or unwilling to feed them through winter. Laurian immediately projects his daily income climbing towards 7,500 silver once the newcomers are settled and registered. Then the first wagon opens, a woman collapses into the snow, and his arithmetic changes direction. Her lips are blue, her fingers are black with frostbite, and the smell inside the wagon belongs to sickness rather than travel. Laurian inspects the caravan and finds fever, violent coughing, diarrhea, frozen extremities, and bodies too still to trust. Some patients have sweat frozen into their clothes, while others are already losing fingers and toes to blackened tissue before treatment even begins. Mars has brought cheap population, but much of it may be carrying disease capable of spreading through healthy Greywood. Laurian grabs the merchant by the collar and demands whether he understands what epidemic sickness can do inside a crowded winter settlement. Mars insists the price was impossible to ignore, which only makes Laurian angrier because cheap rot remains rot. One outbreak could cost far more than 1,200 newcomers by disabling the workforce, already keeping Greywood fed and warm. The system begins registering arrivals as they cross the territory boundary without caring whether they are likely to survive. Its neutrality is almost grotesque because a person coughing blood counts exactly as cleanly as a healthy carpenter walking through the same gate. That automatic optimism irritates Laurian because the ledger sees bodies while he sees a potential chain reaction of disease. He warns Mars that another uninspected purchase will earn him a year cleaning pig pens instead of negotiating caravans. Then Laurian stops wasting time on anger and begins building the only barrier that matters. Gareth receives orders to seal the western edge of town, keeping the newcomers downwind and far from residential districts. No refugee, even one who looks healthy, may enter the main settlement because visible health proves nothing during an outbreak. The Iron Guard raises crude fencing before nightfall and fills the isolated area with every spare tent Greywood can provide. Laurian orders cauldrons kept boiling continuously because clean heat is one of the few reliable medical resources available on short notice. Guards enforce the quarantine in both directions, with no exception for children, servants, nobles, or apparently healthy travelers. All refugee purchasing stops immediately until Greywood develops inspection procedures stronger than Mars's enthusiasm for discounts. The quarantine's location on the windward edge is deliberate because Laurian wants prevailing cold air carrying contamination away from the densest neighborhoods. The fence is crude, but speed matters more than appearance when disease can cross a street faster than carpenters can finish a proper wall. Food deliveries are left at controlled transfer points rather than carried casually from infected tents into town kitchens. Guards receive the same restriction as refugees because discipline collapses if the people enforcing quarantine believe rules are only for the sick. Laurian would rather endure accusations of cruelty for several weeks than explain later why one exception infected thousands. Residents start calling the fenced district a cage, and Laurian allows the name because fear of the fence helps keep healthy people outside it. The quarantine still needs someone capable of understanding plants, fever, frostbite, and practical treatment better than a soldier. Laurian chooses Ella, even though he knows perfectly well that botany does not automatically make her a physician. When she arrives, Ella says exactly that and refuses to pretend crop science and medicine are interchangeable professions. She warns that a wrong root in the wrong quantity can kill faster than frostbite or infection. Laurian answers that doing nothing will kill faster still, and Greywood has nobody better prepared to evaluate herbs under pressure. He reminds her that becoming a minister means accepting emergencies outside the comfortable boundary of her original research. Ella glares at the logic, hates that she cannot defeat it, and enters the quarantine zone anyway. Within a day, she catalogs stored herbs by usefulness against fever, inflammation, frostbite, dehydration, and digestive illness. Willow bark becomes part of fever treatment. Certain root pastes are assigned to damaged tissue, and boiling equipment becomes mandatory. Ella's most useful contribution is not a miracle cure but a process for reducing avoidable mistakes. She separates treatments by symptom, warns volunteers about dangerous doses, and insists water, cloth, and utensils be boiled whenever possible. In a settlement without trained physicians, standardizing simple procedures save more people than any rare herb. Laurian does not offer elaborate thanks because he thinks of the decision as moving a skilled worker to the department with greatest need. He even tells himself Ella would dislike sentimental gratitude, which conveniently allows him to avoid admitting how much he depends on her judgment. Even so, some part of him knows Ella has been pushed into a field hospital she never agreed to run. Knowledge is not enough because sick people still need hands to wash them, feed them, and keep them warm through the night. Laurian remembers Martha, whose household survived the first blizzard because Greywood's preparation kept them alive. She arrives at the fence wrapped in heavy cloth, looks over the tents once, and begins organizing volunteers before Laurian finishes speaking. Within 2 days, more than 300 townspeople are working under Martha inside an improvised medical service. Many are women from quarry and farming families. Others are older residents too weak for field labor, but still capable of patient care. Martha divides them by physical ability, giving stronger volunteers hauling work, while older hands handle cloth, feeding, cleaning, and observation. The arrangement turns people previously considered unproductive into a medical workforce without pulling healthy field crews entirely away from winter tasks. Laurian pays each worker 3 copper daily and adds a flower bonus for every patient who eventually walks out alive. He publicly frames the wages as protecting valuable future labor, which is true without being the whole truth. Martha's teams clean wounds with strong grain alcohol because Greywood has no proper medical instruments and can produce liquor in quantity. They boil Ella's mixtures into thick medicinal soup and force small spoonfuls into patients too weak to feed themselves. The work is rough, exhausting, and completely unlike noble medicine, but nobody inside the tents is left to shiver alone. Strong liquor burns wounds badly enough that patients fight the attendants using it, but infection gives the volunteers little room for gentleness. The same grain spirit Greywood could have sold for profit is instead poured over injuries because it is the closest thing available to bulk disinfectant. Martha's crews work through lice, vomit, fever, sweat, and frozen mud without any noble healer's clean tools or formal training. What they possess is repetition, organization, and enough incentive to keep returning after exhaustion would normally send unpaid helpers home. One patient named Anna is barely more than a child when frostbite and fever leave her hands black and her mind wandering. Martha stays beside her through 2 nights, forcing broth past the point where Anna has stopped caring whether she survives. The girl's fever leaves her talking to people who are not there, and Martha keeps feeding her through every stretch when consciousness disappears again. When the girl finally wakes clearly enough to speak, she asks why Greywood spends good coin saving someone she believes is worthless. Martha tells Anna that as long as a person can still breathe, this lord will find some way for that life to matter. Even damaged hands can learn to twist hemp rope, sort grain, teach children, or perform work that does not require a sword. Gareth later repeats the exchange to Laurian, who answers with only a nod because agreeing too warmly would expose feelings he keeps hidden behind numbers. Most evenings, Laurian stands outside the quarantine fence, telling himself he is inspecting an operation rather than visiting the sick. He describes patients as damaged machinery worth repairing because that language lets him authorize more supply without examining why he cares. Yet the liquor keeps coming, the flour keeps coming, and firewood continues moving toward people who have produced nothing for him yet. Some may never produce anything at all, but Laurian still spends silver to keep their tents hot and their stomachs full. Laurian's evening visits become a habit, despite the fact that he rarely crosses the fence unless an operational decision requires it. He recognizes individual tents and can tell from smoke output which ones are running dangerously cold. That knowledge is difficult to square with his insistence that he only cares about aggregate recovery percentages. If questioned, he can cite mortality, recovered labor, and the catastrophic cost of allowing disease into the healthy districts. Those calculations are valid, but they no longer explain every choice he makes around the quarantine. By the second week, fever deaths begin falling, and Laurian allows himself to call the decline proof that the system of care is working. The improvement is gradual rather than miraculous, measured by fewer bodies leaving the fence and more patients strong enough to sit outside their tents. The relief lasts only until Ball arrives with a new winter crisis written across his face. Greywood's surrounding forest has been cut back to stumps after months of construction, heating, cooking, and industrial expansion. More than 7,000 residents now need fires, while the quarantine burns fuel continuously for boiling water and warmth. Ella's greenhouses consume another constant stream of wood to keep underground flues hot enough for winter crops. Ball estimates Greywood has perhaps 3 days of usable firewood remaining at the current rate. 3 days means houses begin going cold, then sick tents, then the greenhouses carrying months of agricultural investment. Sending crews deeper into the forest during an active blizzard could kill dozens before any timber reaches town. Importing charcoal from distant cities would cost so much that merchants could drain Greywood's treasury simply by waiting for desperation. The fuel shortage threatens several systems simultaneously, which is what makes it more dangerous than a simple household inconvenience. Lose firewood and Greywood loses heat, sanitation, medical boiling, greenhouse protection, cooking, and part of its industrial output together. Buying expensive charcoal would preserve those systems temporarily while transferring control of survival back to outside merchants. Laurian sits with the numbers, searching for a path that does not exchange freezing for bankruptcy. Gareth bursts into the room before Laurian finds one, snow melting from his coat and excitement breaking his usual restraint. Quarry slaves have struck a seam of strange black rock that stains tools, crumbles under pressure, and terrifies everyone near it. Kyle and the others believe they uncovered something cursed, so work has stopped completely until Laurian gives direct orders. The description catches on a memory from Laurian's previous world, enough that he immediately heads for the quarry instead of waiting. Wind cuts across the open pit while slaves cluster at the far side, keeping as much distance from the black seam as possible. Kyle watches Laurian approach with the resigned expression of a prisoner expecting punishment for discovering the wrong thing. Most of the quarry crew has backed against the opposite rock wall, leaving the black seam untouched despite orders that normally keep picks moving constantly. Laurian crouches beside the seam, runs a gloved hand over the rock, and watches black dust smear across the leather. He breaks away a fist-sized piece, studies its weight and grain, then asks a guard for a burning torch. The first touch of flame seems to do nothing, which makes the watching slaves shift nervously behind him. Then one edge begins glowing dull orange and settles into a stubborn burn stronger than the torch feeding it. Heat pushes against Laurian's face, and every other winter problem disappears from his thoughts for several seconds. The black seam is coal, a fuel capable of heating homes, forges, kilns, and eventually industries this world has barely imagined. Laurian has read about coal but never handled a natural seam, so recognition begins as suspicion rather than certainty. The test with fire matters because black color alone could describe several useless minerals. When the rock continues glowing after the torch pulls away, the physical evidence finally matches the old world memory. For the first time in days, the 3-day firewood countdown stops dominating every calculation in his head. It has been under Greywood the entire time, discovered only because desperate workers dug deeper while the forest disappeared. Laurian laughs once from disbelief, and the quarry slaves flinch because they mistake his reaction for anger at a curse. Still holding the burning rock, he tells them there is no demon inside the hillside, only fuel valuable enough to save the entire town. Kyle cautiously asks whether they did something wrong by breaking into the seam. Laurian tells him the opposite. The quarry crew just found something worth far more than the stone they were assigned to cut. Relief moves across the prisoners before Laurian issues a new order, converting the quarry operation into a proper coal mine. Every available laborer is redirected toward tracing the seam deeper, instead of continuing ordinary stone production. Laurian does not free the slaves, because freedom was never part of their arrangement, and profit has not made him sentimental. He considers warm coats and extra food maintenance rather than reward, but the miners receiving them have no access to the distinction inside his head. What he does provide is double rations, warm coats, better tools, and the new title of coal miners. The title means little legally, but several prisoners stand straighter when their dangerous discovery becomes skilled work instead of cursed punishment. By evening, the first cart of coal rolls down into Greywood, while guards follow it with almost the same suspicion the slaves showed underground. Raw coal smells strange enough that one gate guard jokes, "A demon must have fouled the wagon before sending it down the mountain." Gareth ends the debate by taking a chunk and dropping it directly into a dying guardhouse hearth. The coal catches slowly, then produces a steady heat far stronger and longer lasting than the wood Greywood has been rationing. Against an equivalent fire, the new fuel feels roughly 3 times stronger to the men crowded around the guardhouse hearth. One experiment proves enough. The town begins distributing the new fuel before another day is lost. By morning, sulfur-heavy smoke rises from chimneys across Greywood as families learn that strange smell is a small price for warmth. The smell from raw coal is harsh and unfamiliar, which guarantees superstition will spread almost as quickly as the fuel itself. Laurian accepts that because warm rooms will defeat fear faster than official explanations ever could. Once households experience a fire that lasts far longer than their normal wood ration, the argument about demons loses practical importance. Households that had been counting firewood by handfuls stop worrying about whether their hearth will survive the night. The coal burns long enough that families can sleep without waking repeatedly to feed a shrinking stack of precious wood into the flame. Laurian sends the earliest coal shipments to the quarantine district, where cauldrons can finally boil without stealing wood from homes. Martha's team stop rationing hot water, and the sick tents remain warmer for longer stretches. Laurian notices mortality continuing downward as heat improves, but he refuses to decide how much of his sasafchang is personal. Ella's greenhouses gain even more, because coal can drive the underground flues hotter and longer than the previous wood fires. The growing beds begin holding temperatures closer to spring or summer, despite snow piling outside the structures. Ella immediately realizes this can support crops that local farmers would normally wait months to plant, not just protect wheat already in the ground. When Laurian visits, Ella is already sketching warm-season vegetables she wants to attempt in the middle of winter. The coal supply changes her thinking from protecting one wheat crop to testing what seasons themselves can be forced to obey. Laurian tells her to request whatever equipment she needs and promises the mine will provide enough fuel to support the experiments. For once, Ella does not argue with the scale of his ambition because she is too busy redrawing planting schedules. Laurian pauses at the greenhouse door, watching steam rise from warm soil while snow sweeps across the frozen town outside. Once fear disappears from the workforce, coal production increases faster than he expected. Daily carts feed hearths, quarantine fires, greenhouses, smithies, and every operation previously competing for the same shrinking woodpile. Ball's terrifying 3-day countdown quietly becomes irrelevant because Greywood now sits above a fuel reserve measured in rock instead of trees. Several mornings later, the system shows population rising again, as refugees recover enough to leave quarantine and resume normal life. Daily silver income moves beyond the 7,500 level. Laurian, once celebrated before disease, made that number feel dangerous. Coal solves more than the emergency Laurian originally needed it for, and that is what makes the discovery strategically dangerous. A resource capable of heating homes can also run furnaces, support new agriculture, and eventually reshape trade throughout the region. The same seams that saves Greywood can attract armies if neighboring nobles understand its true value too soon. The separate death count has declined for 4 straight days, the first sustained improvement since Mars brought the infected caravan. Recovered refugees also begin crossing from the fenced district into normal housing, converting a medical liability back into workers, neighbors, and stable system population. Laurian closes the ledger and stands at his study window with lukewarm tea, while snow falls over roofs, finally producing steady smoke. The pressure he carried since the caravan arrived loosens, but he does not mistake one solved crisis for the end of winter. Greywood has survived bandits, disease, and fuel shortage, and every solution has made the settlement more valuable than before. The next test arrives at 1 in the morning, when gate horns drag Laurian awake, before he fully understands the system warning. Population remains steady at 7,587, while the system reports a threat approaching from the north. Laurian throws on a coat without fastening it and runs across packed ice toward the wall. Beyond the gate, roughly 200 orcs emerge from the trees looking less like an army than starvation-given weapons. Frost cracks their green-gray skin, their formation barely exists, and hunger has stripped discipline down to forward movement. Their chief, Grom the Bonebreaker, leads from the front with a roar that needs no translation. The blizzard destroyed their winter stores, and smoke, livestock, and cooked grain from Greywood have drawn them toward the only visible food source. On the wall, 500 iron guards form without panic because they spent winter eating full rations and drilling in actual steel. Laurian compares the forces and realizes this should not become a difficult defensive battle unless Greywood makes a serious mistake. Starving attackers are rushing disciplined soldiers behind fortifications, which gives him room to think about capture instead of simple survival. Laurian's capture order also changes how soldiers fight, because disabling a starving orc requires more control than simply killing one at the shield wall. The Iron Guard must trust its armor, formations, and comrades enough to accept that extra risk. Months of full rations and drilling make that discipline possible. The same order would have been absurd with the frightened militia Greywood once possessed. The battle, therefore, proves Laurian's earlier investments in food and steel, as much as it proves Gareth's training. Before the gates open, Laurian sends one unusual order down the line. Take orcs alive whenever possible. Soldiers are told to cut tendons and disable legs, rather than drive every spear through the chest. Confusion moves across the ranks, but Laurian keeps his real reasoning private because few defenders would appreciate discussing enemy resale value mid-attack. Orc muscle can move stone that exhausts mules. Their hides withstand punishment, and unlike animals, they can be legally registered. A living captive can therefore mine, haul, and generate system income, while a corpse provides none of those returns. The Iron Guard meets the first rush in a 3-deep shield line that does not move when the orcs collide with it. Steel spears penetrate weakened bodies, crossbows fire from above, and every new wave reaches the wall with less strength than the last. Hunger has already done much of Greywood's work before the attackers ever enter weapon range. Grom fights longer than most, but 4 soldiers eventually pin his arms, while another cuts the tendon behind one ankle. He drops alive exactly as Laurian ordered, no longer capable of leading another charge or escaping the field. Less than an hour after the first alarm, Gareth sounds the horn ending the pursuit. Laurian stands on the parapet afterward, running numbers that have nothing to do with celebrating victory. Morning reveals 120 dead orcs scattered across the snow outside the defenses. Inside the walls, 82 survivors kneel in a chain line through the square, with Grom at the front. The common rope links them wrist to wrist. Must attempt to bolt drags against the weight of every captive beside him. Greywood's residents gather again to watch, but this time the question is not revenge against raiders. It is what Laurian intends to do with monsters who surrendered. His injured ankle is wrapped tightly, the cloth already freezing, where blood soaked through during the night. Ball walks beside Laurian as the Lord inspects the captives, with the same practical attention used when evaluating draft animals. Laurian turns Grom's forearm, checks the dense muscle, and tests whether the wounded chief can still support heavy labor once healed. Ball finally asks what Laurian believes he is looking at, already afraid of the answer. Laurian tells him these prisoners are not merely monsters. They are high-output heavy machinery no Greywood forge could manufacture. Ball's discomfort grows because Laurian evaluates shoulders, backs, and grip strength with the detached care of a buyer inspecting expensive livestock. An orc can haul loads that would exhaust ordinary men and keep working through jobs designed around brute force rather than delicate skill. Killing them now would waste labor capacity the territory could never purchase honestly for any reasonable amount of coin. Ball answers with the particular silence Laurian has learned means moral horror disguised as professional restraint. A clerk arrives carrying the registration ledger and red ink prepared before Laurian even finished walking the line. Laurian crouches in front of Grom and explains that the surviving tribe has only 2 exits from the square. One path ends in a burial pit before nightfall. The other begins with a thumbprint and permanent registration under Greywood. Those who choose life will be housed, fed, guarded, and worked as legal property until Laurian decides otherwise. He places the point of his sword against Grom's throat and waits without repeating the terms. The orc chief presses his thumb into ink, then onto parchment hard enough to leave a complete mark. The remaining 81 survivors follow because nobody needs the alternative demonstrated a second time. Each thumbprint turns a former attacker into a legal entry in the same registry used for farmers, craftsmen, and refugees. The system responds with its usual emotionless efficiency and adds 82 new registered citizens to Greywood's population. The total rises to 7,669, while a separate projection notes a sharp increase in heavy labor capacity. The system's language calling them citizens remains absurd beside the chains, but Laurian cares only that the classification produces the expected coin. To the system, legal registration appears more important than freedom, species, or willingness. That indifference gives Laurian an economic reason to preserve captives other lords would simply execute after battle. Laurian feels the relief of a balance sheet, moving back toward profit after a night that could have ended very differently. By noon, the orcs are marched in chains toward the coal mine and stone quarry under armed escort. Laurian sets quotas high enough that his older bandit slaves are no longer needed for the most punishing physical work. Those experienced prisoners become overseers instead, trading picks for tally sticks and warmer coats while supervising the new labor tier. Laurian notices he has built a complete hierarchy of exploitation, from people who were trying to kill one another only months earlier. The former bandit slaves understand Greywood's rules well enough to supervise the orcs, because they have already survived the same conversion from enemy to laborer. Promotion also gives them something to lose, just as food and housing once gave the Iron Guard something worth defending. Laurian keeps reproducing the same incentive pattern across different social groups, even when the legal conditions are radically different. He finds the arrangement efficient, ugly, and impossible to deny, then turns his attention toward an industrial problem he considers cleaner. Copperhammer, Greywood's senior smith, has been using raw coal all winter because there was no better fuel available. The sulfur and impurities contaminate the iron, leaving finished metal brittle enough to fail under hard use. Laurian remembers a process from his previous world that can turn the newly discovered coal into something much more useful. He explains that coal should be sealed inside an earthen kiln and heated with limited oxygen for days rather than burned openly. The slow process drives away sulfur and other volatile impurities, leaving a cleaner fuel called coke. Coke can burn hotter and support better carbon control inside the forge, giving Greywood a path toward real steel. Coke matters because raw coal's impurities sabotage the very metal Laurian wants to improve. The new kiln is therefore not a separate invention for its own sake. It is the missing bridge between the mine and dependable steel. Copperhammer understands the practical problem immediately, even if the chemistry behind Laurian's explanation sounds almost mystical to him. Copperhammer builds the kiln brick by brick, packs it tightly, seals the vents with wet clay, and begins the first test. The smith has no inherited recipe to compare against, so the entire experiment rests on Laurian's memory of an industrial process from another world. Laurian has to wait 3 full days, while thin smoke leaks from the seams, which irritates a man accustomed to immediate system numbers. When the seal finally breaks, gray porous blocks emerge, instead of the greasy black fuel that went inside. Copperhammer handles the first piece like a holy relic, then carries it directly to the forge. The material is lighter and cleaner looking than raw coal, enough that the smith understands the kiln changed more than surface appearance. He heats iron with the coke and folds the metal repeatedly, listening to the changing ring beneath each hammer strike. By evening, he is holding a finished blade, whose sound against a nail is clear enough to bring tears through the soot on his face. The smith admits he waited 30 years to see metal behave this way, and had stopped believing he ever would. Laurian tests the sword against an old spear made from Greywood's brittle pre-war iron. One clean swing cuts through the shaft without damaging the new edge, proving the result more convincingly than any speech could. Laurian turns the blade in winter light afterward, checking the edge himself before allowing enthusiasm to become an armory-wide order. Gareth receives immediate orders to remove inferior weapons from the armory as quickly as production allows. From this point forward, Laurian wants real steel on his soldiers rather than the unreliable metal that armed Greywood before his arrival. 3 days later, Mars returns already excited about another profit opportunity created by the coal discovery. The merchant has heard rumors that Greywood remained warm, while neighboring baronies nearly froze solid. He proposes selling raw coal across the north at whatever desperate nobles are willing to pay before winter ends. Laurian rejects the idea because the immediate profit would advertise the exact resource, making Greywood strategically valuable. A disgraced exile sitting on a rich coal seam is not simply a merchant opportunity. He is an invitation for stronger nobles to invent claims. Once nearby lords understand where Greywood's heat comes from, accusations of theft, heresy, or demon worship can become excuses for invasion. Laurian therefore decides to sell the product while hiding the source underneath the story buyers cannot trace back to Greywood's hills. Coal dust is ground fine, mixed with clay and bitter herbs, then pressed into small hexagonal fuel bricks. The finished blocks look manufactured and unnatural enough to support whatever legend Mars chooses to wrap around them. Bitter herbs help mask the familiar sulfur smell, making it harder for an experienced buyer to identify ordinary coal hiding beneath the alchemical performance. Laurian names them alchemy warmstones and tells Mars to claim they were recovered from a collapsed ruin far to the north. The story presents their strange heat as relic magic rather than geology, protecting Greywood's mind behind profitable superstition. Mars is ordered to sell only to wealthy noble houses, never common households likely to compare stories or investigate supply routes. Laurian offers a 70-30 profit split in his own favor, generous enough that Mars accepts before curiosity becomes dangerous. The merchant's 30% is large precisely because the fabricated mystery lets him charge nobles far more than ordinary fuel would ever command. The fake relic story solves two problems at once by raising the selling price while separating the finished brick from a natural mineral seam. Noble buyers are also ideal customers because exclusivity makes them less likely to share samples with ordinary craftsmen. Mars can turn secrecy itself into luxury marketing, which gives him a profit motive to protect the lie instead of merely obeying Laurian. Laurian prefers arrangements where another person's greed performs the security work for him. The merchant understands margins more reliably than threats, which is exactly why Laurian trusts him to protect the profitable lie. The attention they were trying to control arrives less than 2 weeks later beneath the banner of Lord Redleaf. Victor, Redleaf's chief political officer, reaches Greywood with 20 armed escorts and orders to investigate the exiled baron's sudden wealth. His master needs to know whether the rumors represent opportunity, danger, or some combination worth taxing immediately. Before Laurian reaches the gate, Victor's captain discovers Greywood no longer behaves like an undefended frontier settlement. Real steel hangs from the gate guards, armed soldiers hold the wall, and chained orcs haul ore in plain view beyond the road. Gareth refuses entry unless the entire escort surrenders its weapons for the duration of the visit. Victor's men demand the courtesy owed to their lord's name, and neither side appears willing to move first. Horses scrape iron shoes against the frozen road, while both groups wait for someone else to blink. A trivial posture contest with potentially expensive consequences. Laurian arrives while the standoff is one careless sentence away from turning a political inspection into unnecessary bloodshed. He steps between the lines and explains that Greywood offers every courtesy to guests and every precaution toward armed strangers. The distinction lets Victor preserve dignity while surrendering weapons without admitting his escort has been forced to submit. Laurian watches Victor study the steel, the orc labor, and the complete absence of desperation his reports had promised. Whatever Redleaf expected to find here, it was not a frontier town already developing its own industry and disciplined military. Rather than let suspicion grow at the gate, Laurian invites Victor inside for tea and promises a proposal his master can profit from. Appetite replaces some of the caution in Victor's expression, and Laurian immediately prefers that emotion because appetite can be priced. They walk through streets cleaner and busier than Victor expected, past laborers and guards, demonstrating Greywood's transformation without explanation. During the visit, the system quietly updates in Laurian's mind as population growth continues independently of politics. Victor sits across a table while Laurian pours tea slowly and allows silence to make the visitor more uncomfortable than any threat would. By the time Victor finally speaks, the tea between them has cooled and the negotiation has already begun without terms being named. Redleaf, Victor says, is concerned about an unregistered commercial operation near its border producing wealth. Nobody can explain. The polite language hides a simpler demand. His lord wants a share before Greywood becomes valuable enough to challenge openly. Laurian lets Victor finish the entire rehearsed argument before placing a freshly forged steel dagger on the table. The weapon still carries a faint forge smell, and its polished edge catches enough window light to keep drawing Victor's eyes back toward it. He does not point the weapon or threaten with it. He simply allows the quality of the metal to become part of the conversation. Then Laurian gives Victor the numbers behind Greywood instead of begging for recognition. More than 8,000 registered residents now live under his protection, supported by 500 increasingly well-armed guards. Nearly 100 orc laborers provide strength no neighboring work crew can easily match, while the mine keeps the settlement warm. Laurian explains that any attempt to seize the mountain will end with him collapsing the mine before surrendering it intact. If Redleaf comes by force, everyone can freeze together. Laurian has no interest in being the last man to lose. Victor's posture changes because the resource he hoped to threaten has become a hostage Laurian is willing to destroy. Only after establishing that cost does Laurian slide the actual offer across the table. 2,000 silver is prepared immediately as a mineral tax, giving Redleaf a legal-looking payment rather than an open bribe. Greywood will also send 20% of net coal brick profits every month as ongoing tribute. Laurian deliberately ties the percentage to profit rather than gross sales, preserving room to deduct production costs before Redleaf takes its share. In return, Laurian wants Redleaf to publicly place Greywood's mineral holdings under official protection. One declaration and one seal can tell every opportunistic noble nearby that taking Greywood means challenging Redleaf as well. Victor visibly relaxes, because tribute is an outcome he can explain to his master, without admitting Greywood frightened him into compromise. The tribute agreement is deliberately framed as mineral taxation, so Redleaf can defend the arrangement publicly without admitting extortion. Laurian gains political cover, Victor gains revenue, and both sides can describe the same contract in language useful to their own audiences. Neither man mistakes the relationship for friendship, which makes the terms easier to evaluate honestly. The deal works because open conflict would cost both sides more than the compromise costs either side today. He praises the town, the tea, and Laurian's judgment, then departs with terms that seem excellent from Redleaf's perspective. Victor can return home, claiming he converted a suspicious border operation into taxable revenue without spending a single soldier to do it. Laurian watches the carriage disappear and finally smiles once there is nobody left to read the expression. 20% is expensive today, but he sees every payment as a temporary purchase of protection rather than permanent submission. In Laurian's mind, each tribute payment is an invoice against a future day when Greywood no longer needs another lord's banner covering its mine. A future Greywood with 5,000 soldiers will renegotiate from a position very different from the one currently relying on a teapot. For now, Laurian prefers a paid shield to a heroic war. His territory is not yet strong enough to survive. The greater immediate threat is unexpectedly internal, and it appears after population crosses 8,000. Free rations that once kept starving refugees alive have become so normal that many residents now treat them as an entitlement. The first free meal created gratitude, but months of guaranteed food removed urgency from people who get fed whether they work efficiently or not. Laurian sees the pattern as predictable. Once support becomes permanent, gratitude slowly turns into expectation, and then into behavior built around entitlement. Laurian sees workers arriving late, production slowing, and expectations growing faster than output. He summons Ball and orders every general free ration program ended immediately. Ball looks horrified until Laurian explains that removing support without creating income would be cruelty rather than reform. From now on, labor earns wages paid daily in copper across mining, timber, farming, spinning, construction, and other productive work. At the same time, Laurian opens a centralized marketplace stocked with flour, meat, coats, liquor, and basic household supplies. The critical detail is that Greywood itself owns the market and receives most of the wages back when workers spend them. Basic goods are priced low enough to remain accessible, because empty pockets would destroy the incentive loop just as surely as free distribution did. Ball points out that Laurian is paying coin from one chest only to collect it again from another by evening. Laurian agrees and explains that the circulation itself is not the goal. The behavior created between payment and purchase is. A person guaranteed food has little reason to hurry, while a worker whose dinner depends on today's wage suddenly values time differently. Laurian is buying urgency, competition, and measurable output, with copper serving only as the mechanism carrying those incentives. Daily wages also generate information Laurian never had under free distribution, because payment records reveal which crews are actually producing measurable work. Piece rates expose slow workshops, shift bonuses reveal desirable jobs, and marketplace sales show what households value when they control the coin themselves. The wage economy therefore becomes both an incentive system and a stream of data about how Greywood functions. Greywood changes almost overnight once the first payday proves the new system is real. Workers who once waited for distribution now compete for early shifts because the difference between moving quickly and slowly appears directly in that evening's purchasing power. Carts begin moving before dawn, mine crews argue for better shifts, and spinners race one another for piece rate bonuses. Even guards appear straighter. When service produces coin, they personally control, instead of another bowl from the common kitchen. Gareth finds Laurian after receiving his first wage and grins, while calculating what a full month of paid service can buy his household. The old soldier values coin he earned differently from food, handed out automatically, even though both ultimately came from the same lord's treasury. That reaction settles Laurian's argument more effectively than anything written in Ball's ledger, because wages changed how Gareth values his own effort. Winter finally begins loosening its grip, but Greywood's next opportunity arrives before the open fields are ready to produce anything. Ella enters Laurian's study without knocking, carrying a basket full of fresh green vegetables grown in the underground greenhouses. She is openly excited by the result, explaining how compost, controlled heat, and improved planting schedules accelerated the second crop. Laurian listens until his mind reaches a more profitable destination than the town kitchens Ella expected to supply. Deep winter in Red Leaf City means noble families have spent months living on grain, preserved meat, and almost no fresh produce. Laurian remembers the nutritional consequences from his previous life: bleeding gums, poor healing, weakness, and the slow misery of scurvy. Fresh vegetables are therefore not common food in that market. To desperate nobles, they can be sold as something close to medicine. He tells Ella the first harvest will not be distributed locally and orders Mars to pack it in insulated crates for Red Leaf City. The merchant receives another invented story to protect Greywood's real methods and increase the perceived rarity of the cargo. Mars will call the vegetables leaves of life, a rare elven harvest available in the dead of winter at a suitably miraculous price. The fiction because wealthy buyers already know the symptoms those greens relieve, even if they do not understand the missing nutrient causing them. Ella calls Laurian shameless to his face, and he does not dispute the accusation, because the target customers can easily afford the fiction. Every gold coin taken from noble dining rooms can fund housing, tools, schools, defenses, and population growth back in Greywood. That morning, the system reports 8,521 residents, and another change Laurian values even more. The wage economy has increased territory productivity by 50%, confirming that people are working harder when effort controls income. The 50% productivity notice is the first system confirmation that Laurian's economic theory altered territory performance rather than merely moving money around. That makes wages more than a social experiment. They become a proven mechanic capable of scaling future expansion. Laurian immediately treats the bonus as permanent capacity he can spend on the next population increase. Laurian watches meltwater begin sliding from the eaves and realizes winter has stopped being a survival problem and become a platform for expansion. In Red Leaf City, Victor opens the first crate himself and stares at green leaves that should not exist at this point in the season. Mars does not ask for gold when he finally names Greywood's price, because Laurian wants something more permanent. Skilled people are specifically requested because a carpenter or smith increases future capacity, while also satting the same daily system coin as anyone else. The requested payment is 100 trained people. Smiths, carpenters, weavers, and other skilled hands Red Leaf can spare more easily than Greywood. Back home, Ball questions why Laurian would exchange valuable produce for more mouths instead of accepting simple treasure. Laurian explains that gold only has value, while another territory remains willing to sell what Greywood needs. Roads can close, prices can change, coin can be devalued, and a hostile lord can make a pile of metal useless with one embargo. Registered people are different because every resident inside Greywood generates silver directly through the system, regardless of outside trade. A skilled worker also creates tools, housing, clothing, and knowledge, multiplying value beyond the daily coin attached to a name. Trading vegetables that rot for people who produce recurring income is therefore an easy decision in Laurian's accounting. He orders Mars to repeat the offer in Black Iron Territory and Storm Fortress wherever nobles possess workers they undervalue. Laurian sets a target of 10,000 registered citizens before the ground completely thaws. The target is aggressive enough that housing, employment, food production, and administration all have to expand together rather than treating population as a number that grows by itself. His terms remain selective because he wants young, able workers and trained specialists rather than using the trade as charity. His preference for healthy young workers is openly utilitarian because every imported person adds obligations before their labor creates anything useful. Greywood can absorb more dependents later, but Laurian refuses to overload housing and food systems, simply to appear benevolent now. Population growth is an investment strategy, and Laurian refuses to pretend otherwise simply because people benefit from being imported. The danger of growing richer becomes personal when an assassin enters the manor grounds, disguised as an ordinary laborer with a delivery cart. An orc guard notices something wrong with the man's movement and kills him before he reaches Laurian's door. Laurian dislikes losing a potential interrogable attacker, but the untouched poison blade proves the guard chose correctly when seconds mattered. The disguise fools ordinary eyes, but the guard catches a hitch in the assassin's gait that does not match an exhausted delivery worker. A poisoned dagger is found still sheathed on the corpse, proving how little distance separated Laurian's plans from ending in one hallway. Standing over the body the next morning, Laurian confronts a weakness no wall, granary, or ledger can eliminate by itself. He is still one human body, and one successful knife can terminate the entire system of decisions built around him. Fear sends him to Gareth's training yard faster than wounded pride ever could. Laurian makes clear that he does not want elegant swordsmanship, dueling etiquette, or an honorable way to die. He wants practical survival techniques, designed for a man who expects professional killers to ignore fairness completely. The first tool becomes a compact repeating crossbow, fitted along his forearm beneath loose clothing. Its bolts carry poison strong enough that Laurian does not intend to require a second accurate shot. A dagger is strapped where he can reach it quickly for one low, ugly strike rather than a prolonged exchange. Nothing in the arrangement is designed to look noble. Every weapon exists to create the few seconds Laurian needs to escape a stronger killer. Laurian also rewrites the guard's emergency procedure around protecting his life rather than protecting noble dignity. The protocol assumes attackers may be stronger than Greywood's defenders, so every step favors confusion, distance, numbers, and escape over personal heroics. If attackers come again, guards throw blinding powder first and drag Laurian into the densest concentration of armed orc laborers second. Very few assassins will willingly fight through a mass of powerful orcs simply to reach one merchant-minded lord in the center. Grom begins conditioning Laurian most mornings, with weighted carries, repeated sprints, and exercises that leave his lungs burning. After several weeks, Laurian accepts that he does not need to become a great swordsman before the next assassination attempt. He only needs enough endurance to survive the first surprise and reach the people whose job is killing the attacker for him. The conditioning embarrasses Laurian because Grom can move weighted sacks that leave the Baron shaking after one short run. That humiliation is useful, precisely because it strips away the fantasy that status or intelligence can protect an untrained body from a knife. Laurian measures progress in extra seconds of sprinting and faster recovery, rather than elegant forms he will never rely on in a real attack. Spring planting begins while more than 1,000 new serfs arrive through the Vegetable for Workers exchange. One newcomer, Hans, spent his entire life plowing red leaf soil behind slow oxen and expects Greywood's fields to work the same way. On his first morning, he reaches the eastern acreage and stops because no oxen are pulling the largest plows. The iron blades are wide enough to look excessive by red leaf farming standards, yet the orc teams drag them without the slow strain Hans expects from animals. Iron plows weighing more than 200 kilograms are harnessed behind teams of orc laborers who run rather than walk. The blades rip frozen earth into deep black furrows at a pace Hans cannot compare with any farm practice he has ever known. Ground that would have consumed his family for most of a week is opened in minutes without animals stopping for rest. Hans and another new arrival stare without speaking, because Greywood is operating on rules they were never taught to imagine. They came from a world of oxen, inherited routines, and winters that simply killed whoever could not endure them. Here, industrial metal, captive orc strength, system wealth, and Laurian's old-world knowledge are beginning to alter what 1 acre can produce. The heavy iron plows are possible only because Greywood now controls better metal production and possesses labor strong enough to pull them without oxen. Several earlier investments therefore converge again: captured orcs, imported smiths' coal, coke steel, and reclaimed farmland. Hans sees only one astonishing machine-like scene, while Laurian sees a stack of decisions finally paying each other back. The newcomers understand the speed long before they understand the cost paid by the laborers making that speed possible. While Greywood transforms openly, Laurian slowly pieces together why powerful enemies have begun paying attention to him. Part of the truth comes through things Sylvie later reveals, and the rest comes from information gathered through Mars's trade contacts. 5 months before Laurian ever reached Greywood, House Bohunia had been effectively erased from the political map. Duke Golden Lion wanted the family's river holdings and created the necessary opening by accusing Laurian's father of treason. The accusation did not need to be true. It only needed enough political weight that frightened allies decided defending House Bohunia cost more than abandoning it. Once the accusation began, political allies abandoned the house quickly enough that the purge completed itself with very little resistance. Laurian's mother and older brother survived by remaining quiet, protecting themselves instead of challenging the charges destroying the family. They assumed Laurian's exile to a ruined border barony would end with a slow death too insignificant to investigate. From their perspective, Greywood was not a second chance, but a burial sentence delayed long enough to preserve appearances. They spent neither money nor influence confirming whether he remained alive after being discarded. Laurian's sister Serena was the exception. She refused to rely on the same assumption. When rumors reached her that the supposedly doomed younger brother was generating wealth in Greywood, she saw danger before opportunity. Golden Lion spies heard the same rumors and interpreted Laurian's recovery as evidence House Bohunia might be financing a return. Serenus empties her private accounts and sends her most trusted knight north before the Duke's people can act first. She does it without asking the rest of House Bohunia for permission, because the relatives who survived the purge already proved silence was their preferred strategy. That knight is Sylvie, a silver-haired Tier 3 swordswoman with enough skill to survive multiple ambushes on the road. Serena gives her two instructions: find Laurian and prevent anyone from finishing what the family purge started. Sylvie's survival on the road also proves Serena's warning was not paranoia, because someone repeatedly tried to stop the message from reaching Greywood. The attacks happened in different terrain, suggesting resources and coordination beyond one opportunistic roadside gang. By the time Sylvie reaches the gate, she has already seen enough to know Golden Lion's interest in Laurian is active rather than theoretical. Laurian knows none of this when Gareth escorts Sylvie through Greywood's gate at Spear Point. Her travel cloak is filthy, dried blood marks one sleeve, and her weapons have already been surrendered at multiple checkpoints. Gareth still searches her again, because Greywood's recent assassination attempt has made repeated caution more acceptable than one elegant mistake. She fought through hired interceptors twice while traveling north, once in a river gorge and again on an exposed trade road. Sylvie expected to find a shack, a labor camp, or perhaps a grave carrying the name of the lord she was sent to protect. Instead, she enters a fortified settlement defended by steel-armed guards, standing proper rotations along a wall built within one season. Orcs haul heavy equipment through fields, industrial smoke rises from a foundry, and the town looks nothing like political rumor described. Laurian watches her absorb all of it, while Gareth checks again for hidden weapons, despite her obvious irritation. When he learns she is an elite knight, personally loyal to Serena, Laurian's first reflex is embarrassingly financial. A Tier 3 bodyguard would cost a fortune he never planned to spend, yet one has arrived at his gate, already funded by his sister. Laurian asks Sylvie to remain as his personal guard, and immediately adds that she may not draw steel without his permission. He needs protection, but he also refuses to let an elite swordswoman accidentally turn a political visit into a blood feud, because instinct outruns strategy. The restriction offends someone trained to trust instinct and swordsmanship, but Sylvie stays because her mission matters more than pride. Then she delivers the warning Serena sent her across several baronies to provide. Duke Golden Lion is pressuring Redleaf and 3 neighboring lords to isolate Greywood from every external supply line at once. Grain, salt, pig iron, refugees, and ordinary trade will be blocked at every legal crossing and most useful back roads. Once scarcity weakens the town, men dressed as bandits are expected to attack the survivors and erase the final evidence of interference. The disguise will allow Golden Lion to destroy Greywood without placing his own banner anywhere near the ashes. Sylvie urges Laurian to abandon the territory immediately and retreat to a hidden stronghold. Serena, prepared for exactly this kind of collapse. She talks about Greywood as if it is an unfortunate position that can be surrendered to preserve the person standing inside it. Sylvie's instinct is preservation of Laurian's life first, even if that means sacrificing everything he built in Greywood. Laurian's instinct is the opposite, because abandoning 10,000 future residents would destroy both his system engine and the only independent power base he possesses. Their disagreement is therefore not about courage. It is about which asset each of them considers irreplaceable. Laurian nearly laughs because the embargo she fears is designed to attack dependencies Greywood has spent the entire winter eliminating. The greenhouses can produce grain outside the normal season, making imported food less important than Golden Lion's plan assumes. Coal-fired furnaces and Greywood's own metalworking reduce the need for Redleaf's pig iron more each week. Workers are already boiling local brine into salt before Sylvie even finishes describing that part of the blockade. Laurian compares the embargo to threatening to unplug a machine that quietly built its own generator months ago. Every greenhouse, furnace, salt pan, and mine therefore becomes part of Greywood's defense, even though none of them looks like a weapon from the outside. Rather than retreat, he intends to answer economic pressure with an offensive strategy conducted through markets instead of battlefields. Greywood will flood Redleaf with steel hoes, sickles, nails, and ordinary tools priced so local blacksmiths cannot compete. Laurian is willing to sacrifice margin now, because destroyed competitors cannot raise prices later when customers have nowhere else to buy comparable steel. Laurian is willing to sell below immediate profit if doing so destroys competitors and makes customers dependent on Greywood manufacturing. One shop at a time, Redleaf's own producers can be pushed out until farmers and nobles both rely on goods from Laurian's territory. No wall needs to fall if the enemy's money, skilled labor, and purchasing habits slowly move toward Greywood on their own. Laurian wants Redleaf weakened without martyrs, heroic battles, or burn cities, because commerce can transfer power while everyone involved keeps calling the process trade. Sylvie studies him like someone rewriting every story she ever heard about the useless spare heir of House Bohunia. She still warns that markets take time to collapse, while one competent assassin can finish the problem before economics has any chance to work. Sylvie does not reject the market war plan itself. She rejects the assumption that economic time will be granted to carry it out. Her experience with professional violence keeps returning the conversation to the same vulnerability Laurian discovered after the first poisoned dagger. Sylvie has already sensed 3 hidden presences inside Greywood, trained well enough that ordinary guards never noticed them. Her warning confirms the manor's first attacker was not an isolated accident, but part of a continuing professional effort to reach Laurian. She estimates 2 are at least Tier 2, and the third may be stronger, which makes Laurian think about captures before fear fully arrives. Professional killers come with exceptional conditioning, reflexes, and bodies already trained far beyond ordinary laborers. To Laurian's twisted accounting, assassins taken alive are premium workers delivered by the enemy at no acquisition cost. The 3 call themselves Shadowblade, and were paid with red leaf coin to infiltrate a coal brick warehouse where intelligence claimed Laurian slept. Their information is good enough to identify a plausible sleeping location, which tells Laurian someone has been observing Greywood closely rather than guessing from outside. Greywood allows that rumor to remain useful and prepares a bed exactly where the killers expect to find one. Beneath the blankets lies a scarecrow packed with scrap metal, so a cautious probing blade still feels like it has struck a body. Laurian is not in the bed. He is pressed flat against a beam in the rafters above the warehouse. In his hand sits a crude flash device built by Greywood smiths from lime, magnesium shavings, and coal-derived powder. Sylvie wanted to meet the intruders with a sword, but Laurian sees honorable combat as an irrational way to confront people better trained than him. The Shadowblade team slips inside quietly and strikes the false sleeper in near-perfect unison. 3 blades sink into stuffed cloth and scrap iron, producing none of the breathing or blood the assassins expected. Laurian lights the fuse above them and turns his head before the device detonates. He tests the mixture only once beforehand and trusts the plan enough to use it, but not enough to risk looking directly at the flash. White light swallows the warehouse while a violent crack leaves all 3 attackers blind, disoriented, and struggling to hear. Gareth's crossbow squad enters through side doors on the exact signal they practiced in advance. Every shooter aims low because Laurian has repeatedly ordered legs targeted whenever capture remains possible. 2 Tier 2 assassins take bolts through their thighs before either can locate the soldiers who fired them. The Tier 3 fighter remains dangerous on instinct alone, slashing broad arcs into empty space while moving toward imagined threats. Gareth closes from behind and cuts the tendon at the back of his ankle before the assassin can recover his vision. All 3 are shackled alive, and the strongest is still blinking through the fading flash when Laurian climbs down from the rafters. The trap works because every piece is designed around what trained killers expect a frightened noble to do. They expect a guarded bedroom, so Laurian gives them a bed. They expect a blade fight after discovery, so he gives them light and noise instead. Gareth's men never need to outduel Shadowblade, because the plan removes sight, hearing, mobility, and surprise before close combat begins. Within a week, the failed killers are working underground beside orcs and former bandits, instead of carrying knives for red leaf. Their combat training does not exempt them from labor. In Laurian's system, failed violence merely determines how valuable the captured body may be afterward. Laurian considers the reassignment the correct use of resources that unsuccessfully attempted to remove him from the system. Sylvie watches the entire operation without praising it, because nothing about the victory resembles the swordsmanship she was trained to respect. What unsettles her is that Laurian's dishonorable methods work decisively while exposing him to less danger than her preferred approach. The next morning, Laurian orders every assassin weapon melted, rather than preserved as proof of Red Leaf's involvement. Sylvie is more confused by destroying evidence than she was by the flash trap. Laurian explains that Greywood is not strong enough to survive open war against Red Leaf and several cooperating baronies. Publicly accusing them now would hand stronger enemies a political excuse to escalate before his defenses can support that conflict. Revenge therefore needs to remain invisible until the target is already dependent, weakened, or unable to respond effectively. Rather than display captured daggers, Laurian redirects forges toward the civilian goods required for his economic attack. Destroying the evidence protects short-term peace, while weaponizing production lets him answer the attack in a form Red Leaf cannot easily condemn without admitting dependency. Military production slows temporarily while smiths produce hoes, pots, nails, sickles, hinges, and ordinary tools in enormous quantities. Those goods are priced aggressively enough that Red Leaf's local workshops will struggle to match the metal quality without destroying their own margins. Mars also delivers discounted Greywood steel directly to Victor's household as a gesture of appreciation for official protection. Laurian knows gratitude is useful when it creates dependency, especially among nobles who prefer believing they are receiving special treatment. Common farmers are meant to learn that Greywood tools are cheaper and better before Red Leaf's rulers understand what that preference is doing. Then noble estates will begin relying on the same supply chain because replacing broken local production becomes inconvenient and expensive. Laurian's ideal victory is one where Red Leaf becomes a customer before realizing it has stopped behaving like a threat. Selling civilian tools below comfortable margins also forces Laurian's own workshops to become more efficient if they want the strategy to continue. That pressure is acceptable because Greywood's coal and wage systems give his producers cost advantages Red Leaf smiths do not possess. He is not simply discounting goods. He is weaponizing an industrial structure built through the winter. That strategy is progressing when the system interrupts with a problem Laurian has never seen before. Population reaches 10,025. But the usual growth report now carries a new penalty beneath the total. The milestone should have been a celebration because Laurian reached the population target he set during winter. Yet the deduction immediately steals the satisfaction from it. Administrative disorder has triggered a management chose deduction that cuts daily silver income by 15%. Laurian stares at the loss longer than any battlefield casualty report because his system has never punished growth before. The number produces a colder fear than blades do. The fear that scale itself may be turning against the model he built Greywood around. He walks the length of the granary and back while tracing the source of the problem through every layer of administration. Thousands of serfs, dozens of officers, mine overseer, workshop leaders, and supply supervisors now depend on instructions passed verbally. Most cannot read, and many cannot perform basics arithmetic without counting physically on their hands. That limitation was manageable when Laurian supervised a small town personally, but 10,000 residents create more decisions each day than one person can verify. Orders change as exhausted messengers repeat them. Shipments arrive at wrong locations, and small errors multiply across a territory this large. Laurian recognizes the simple truth beneath the penalty. Greywood has outgrown administration based on memory and oral command. In this society, literacy is guarded by nobles, and the Church of Light as a privileged commoners are discouraged or even punished for pursuing. In harsher territories, a commoner secretly teaching letters can face mutilation, which explains why grown supervisors approach Laurian's school with genuine fear. Laurian ignores that tradition and decrees mandatory night classes for every production leader, guard officer, and mine supervisor. The order includes consequences because he believes any policy without cost for failure is merely a suggestion dressed in authority. Supervisors who refuse to learn lose pay, and repeat failures mean reassignment from clerical responsibility back to manual coal hauling. The threat makes literacy materially valuable overnight, turning a forbidden elite skill into something ambitious workers need if they want to keep higher status positions. Ella takes responsibility for arithmetic and numbers, teaching adults who have spent their lives avoiding written calculation. Her lessons focus first on practical sums, inventory marks, and quantity supervisors can apply the next morning rather than abstract scholarship. Sylvie helps drill officers using a command manual Laurian writes himself, turning formations and supply orders into repeatable written procedures. A copied page can preserve an order exactly after 3 handoffs, solving the distortion Laurian kept seeing when commands traveled only through speech. For the first time, Greywood can send an instruction without depending entirely on the memory of every person carrying it forward. San stands outside the schoolhouse one night, watching grown foremen whisper numbers under their breath like children learning first words. A strange warmth reaches him before he can turn the scene into productivity statistics. He insists privately that education is only another investment designed to eliminate the chaos penalty and improve administrative accuracy. Literate supervisors can read shipment orders, count inventory, compare quotas, and execute commands without requiring Laurian's presence. If hundreds of serfs also learn to read their own names along the way, he tells himself that outcome is simply a useful side effect. Laurian's school decree quietly attacks a deeper social structure than the management penalty that triggered it. A foreman who can read no longer depends on a priest, noble clerk, or educated intermediary to interpret every written instruction. Laurian did not set out to redistribute that power, but efficiency makes the old monopoly on literacy increasingly inconvenient to preserve. The justification is technically true, but it no longer completely hides how much Greywood's changes affect him when nobody is watching. Education becomes another example of Laurian, using selfish arithmetic to produce benefits that would sound charitable under any other explanation. While classes begin repairing the administrative weakness, the embargo Sylvie warned about starts tightening around Greywood in real time. Grain shipments disappear first, then salt orders, then external iron, with restrictions arriving from several directions almost together. The synchronized closures confirm Sylvie's warning was accurate, and that Golden Lion has enough influence to make neighboring rulers cooperate against Greywood. Border routes that once carried refugees and merchant traffic begin closing under pressure connected to Duke Golden Lion. The coordinated timing matters because the blockade is designed as a noose, not a series of isolated trade disputes. Laurian has prepared for many of its components, yet preparation on paper feels different once neighboring territories actually stop selling. Greenhouses can replace some grain, local brine can become salt, coal can power furnaces, and Greywood's own industry can supply tools. The embargo therefore arrives after Laurian has already spent months turning external necessities into internal production lines, mostly for reasons that originally looked unrelated. What Laurian cannot model as easily is the person designing the attack and what that person will do when starvation fails. Sylvie reminds him that the 3 Shadowblade assassin sets were likely only a probe, cheap enough to test Greywood's defenses without committing real strength. A duke capable of destroying House Bohunia through political manipulation will not abandon the campaign because 3 hired killers disappeared. Laurian understands cost curves, trade dependency, market saturation, labor incentives, and the slow economic bleeding of a rival. Those tools let him predict how systems behave when people inside them respond to prices and shortages. Golden Lion is different because one angry decision from a powerful man can ignore efficient economics entirely. Numbers cannot tell Laurian whether the next attack will target his throat, poison his food, burn his fields, or corrupt someone inside his walls. They cannot tell him whether the next wagon through the gate carries grain, spies, plague, or a weapon hidden under sacks. The embargo also tests whether Greywood's independence is real or merely something Laurian convinced himself existed while roads remained open. Each canceled shipment removes one external safety net and forces local substitutes to perform without backup. The blockade is therefore not only an enemy action, but a live stress test of every independence project Greywood funded during winter. Success will prove the territory can survive political isolation. Failure will reveal which dependency Golden Lion correctly identified. That uncertainty begins to matter more. As Greywood's people become convinced, their lord already has an answer for every crisis. Laurian has encouraged that confidence because panic destroys productivity faster than most shortages ever could. He cannot announce uncertainty every time a threat appears without teaching the town to distrust the systems he needs people to keep following under pressure. The hidden cost is that thousands of residents now sleep more easily because they believe he knows how to keep them safe. He has trenches for raiders, quarantine for disease, coal for winter, steel for defense, wages for productivity, and schools for administration. None of those systems reveals the next move of a duke who has already lost money, influence, and the satisfaction of watching Greywood fail. Laurian returns to his study after another day of blockade reports and leaves the candle burning while he reviews the same figures repeatedly. The foundry continues operating outside, proof that the embargo has not yet accomplished what Golden Lion intended. That steady industrial noise is reassuring for the town and unsettling for Laurian, because every furnace still burning gives Golden Lion another reason to escalate. Greenhouses remain warm, mine carts continue moving, and every functioning workshop makes Greywood harder to starve than the Duke expected. That success does not relax Laurian, because a cornered enemy may become less predictable precisely when the obvious strategy stops working. He thinks about the purge of House Bohunia and how easily Golden Lion turned accusations into political collapse without needing open battle. A man who prefers indirect destruction has entire categories of attack Laurian has not yet learned to price. Soren understood that danger before Laurian did, which is why Sylvie crossed multiple baronies instead of sending a reassuring letter. Laurian also knows his mother and older brother still appear willing to survive by silence, leaving Serena as the only family member who acted for him. That knowledge complicates his instinct to reduce every relationship to cost, because Sylvie's presence cannot be explained by his own investment. She is here because his sister spent private wealth to protect him, without any guarantee of repayment. Laurian does not have a comfortable accounting category for that kind of loyalty, so he largely avoids discussing it. Instead, he reviews guard placement, warehouse access, food storage, and messenger routes as though enough operational detail can substitute for prediction. Every improvement reduces one vulnerability while revealing another created by Greywood's increasing size and visibility. 10,000 residents make the territory wealthier, but they also make secrecy impossible and failure far more expensive. More industry makes Greywood independent, but it also gives neighboring nobles stronger reasons to want control of the town. Coal, steel, winter crops, and a disciplined labor force are each defensive advantages that become political bait the moment outsiders learn they exist together. Better soldiers deter bandits, but their steel advertises that Laurian possesses resources no exile should reasonably command. Population is still the engine of his power, yet every added life becomes another person he must keep fed, warm, organized, and protected. The system rewards a headcount instantly, while the real world sends the bill later through housing, sanitation, food, security, and administration. The same system that rewards expansion therefore forces Laurian to become better at governing whether he wanted that role or not. He began by treating Greywood as a machine, designed to turn registered people into recurring silver. Now the machine has grown large enough that protecting the numbers means understanding the human systems hidden underneath them. Late that night, Laurian stands at his window with the embargo, the school program, and the captured assassins all competing for space in his thoughts. He has spent the season solving problems by converting each one into a number he can attack with labor, money, technology, or incentives. The candle on his desk burns down while foundry fires continue below, turning the darkness outside orange in slow pulses. Somewhere beneath those lights, more than 10,000 people are sleeping because they believe Greywood has survived worse, and will survive this too. Laurian cannot share that certainty, because every previous crisis announced itself in a form he eventually learned how to calculate. Bloodblade brought riders, disease brought symptoms, winter brought a fuel countdown, and the system exposed administrative disorder with a percentage. Golden Lion's next move has no visible number attached to it yet. That absence bothers Laurian more than bad statistics would, because a bad number can at least be measured, modeled, and assigned a cost. Laurian suspects the Duke still has several options unplayed, and none of his ledgers can identify which one will arrive first. A messenger might carry poison instead of terms, a warehouse fire might begin from inside, or the next knife may avoid every trap that worked before. For once, the man who built Greywood by trusting arithmetic has to admit arithmetic cannot predict another man's pride. He does not abandon the town, and he does not pretend the danger is solved. He keeps the furnaces burning and prepares to meet whatever reaches the gate. The decision is the closest thing to certainty available. Greywood will continue producing, learning, and fortifying while Laurian waits for the enemy to reveal the next problem. Greywood ends the night stronger, richer, and more independent than it began, but Laurian finally understands that survival now depends on more than numbers alone.